is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories this hour. The last airlifts from Kabul airport after the deadly bombing which killed more than 100 people, including 13 US service personnel.
We will hunt you down and make you pay.
President Biden vows to retaliate against those responsible for the killings in Afghanistan.
Meanwhile, Afghans in Greece remember their escape from the Taliban 20 years ago. But is the country ready to welcome more migrants?
And the US central bank chief says he'll start winding down support for the economy by the end of the year. The United States is on high alert, fearing more attacks in Afghanistan after Kabul International Airport was bombed. More than 100 people were killed, including 13 American service personnel. Unconfirmed reports suggest the overall death toll could be as high as 170. President Biden has vowed that those responsible will be hunted down.
Well, the United Nations has described the act as a hideous assault on desperate civilians. And despite the threat of further attacks, hundreds of people have returned to the airport in Kabul, risking their lives to escape the Taliban. And the UK Foreign Secretary has said within the last half hour that 2 British nationals and the child of another were killed in that blast. Michael Voss reports.
All gates are now closed at Kabul airport following Thursday's deadly bomb blast, but thousands of desperate Afghans are back there hoping to get on one of the last flights out. More than a dozen US soldiers and scores of Afghans died after Islamic State suicide bombers targeted a checkpoint manned by US soldiers. US President Joe Biden has promised to hunt down those responsible.
We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
Following the attack, Prime Minister Boris Johnson said that despite what he called a barbaric act, the evacuations would continue.
The conclusion is that we're able to continue with the programme in the way that we've been running it, according to the timetable that we've got, and that's what we're going to do.
But Britain is wrapping up its evacuations at Kabul airport, and the final flights out for British nationals and Afghan allies and their families will be over by the end of the day.
For now, we are going to get our last 1,000 out, the people on the inside of the airfield that we've brought across from Barnes Hotel. We will process them, bring them out, and if possible, if we identify people outside still that we can find a way of getting in, then we will see what we can do, but it is not, the main process, the main effort is over.
Afghan refugees who've managed to get out are starting to arrive in Britain. The government says it's evacuated 13,000 people so far. They're part of more than 100,000 civilians flown out since the Taliban took over Kabul. But not everyone eligible to leave has managed to get out.
Here at the Foreign Office, they're encouraging those who were left behind to try and find safe exit by other means, such as crossing the border into Pakistan. The hope is to process applications at the embassy there. It's unclear, though, how the Taliban will react to people trying to cross the border, or just how many refugees Pakistan will let in. Michael Voss, CGTN, London.
Well, let's take you live to Kabul right now, talk to Zamarilai Abasine, who's there for us. And Zamarilai, after those explosions that we saw there in Michael Voss's report and the terrible loss of life, Afghans must be even more fearful than ever for their security.
Hello, Polly. Yes, the people of capital are frightened, feared and frustrated, and they have no idea what their future would look like. And not only security situation, it's also economic situation that make them worry and fear of the future. The situation is getting worse while the Taliban said that they will open the bank. It was Friday, and it was an off day, but Saturday it's expected that the banks will be open, and that's a big issue. Well, meantime, there are other issues like the people are getting out of cash. People are afraid of the situation, and now the Daesh or ISKP. These are the recent fears of the people of Kabul, where they're mourning their loved ones who have lost their lives. Just Thursday evening attacks, which happened and occurred in Kabul airport. The situation is getting worse among the psychological aspects of the society. The psychological torture has been started, and their fear of their future. There is not much certain ways that the Taliban have produced or introduced to the people that what would they do all along the way with the Daesh, with economic issues, and also social affairs.
Zamarulai, thank you very much indeed.
Well, those who've managed to escape Afghanistan are now being given refuge in countries around the world. Qatar has become a major transit area. Bilal Sawawi is an Afghan journalist and the face and voice of so many reports from Kabul over many, many years. He joins us now from Doha. Welcome, Bilal. Your life was threatened in Afghanistan. You reached Qatar. I wonder, what are your thoughts as you watch these terrible events unfold at the airport and their aftermath?
Well, heartbreaking, even to know that your own friends and their families were caught in an explosion and you haven't heard from them is, I think, the sort of, torture that Abbasin was mentioning that Afghans have to go through. But there is a sense of uncertainty and fear prevailing in Kabul. People are very desperate to leave the country, and they have been, enduring a lot of hardships outside of that airport. Whether you talk about days and days of wait in the open and the scorching heat, or people literally, waiting inside the Suez Canal where the double suicide attacks took place in that area. I was looking today at social media and speaking to certain Afghan families in Kabul, and to know that one family lost 3 of its members, another lost 4, and another family had lost 5 members and 2 are missing. It sort of gives you an idea that how this is a never-ending tragedy for the people of Afghanistan. And the fact that now the Islamic State has been able to carry an attack like this also poses a threat to the Taliban government and to the Taliban authority. So the road ahead, quite tragically, does look one of uncertainty, economic hardships, and bloodshed at a time when Afghanistan still does not have a functioning government, at a time when all state institutions crumbled, at a time when there's no policing and intelligence operations on the streets of Kabul. And for the Taliban, I think the biggest challenge is how do they transition from fighting into governing? We have to really remember the Taliban might have been good at fighting over the years, but their fighters are absolutely unfamiliar with governing Kabul.
Was all of this inevitable? Wasn't the end of America's time in Afghanistan always going to be pretty painful and pretty bloody?
If you look back, the way the American administration announced the withdrawal date in the absence of a peace process or a comprehensive ceasefire, I think that was the start. The Americans also started withdrawing their contractors from Bagram Air Base. And what it meant, that the Afghan Air Force, for example, or the Afghan National Security Forces, especially the Special Forces, did not have the technical help, for the maintenance of helicopters and planes. And then, we heard at that time that the CIA station was also evacuated from Kabul. They were based at the Ariana Hotel close to the presidential palace. So American ears and eyes and, technical help also was something that the Afghan government didn't have. And then the political divisions in Kabul, the bickering among the government officials and politicians, and the fact that Kabul was so disconnected from its own battlefield military commanders, I think all contributed to this very quick demise. I would say the Taliban started offering the mass surrender and insurance deals to people, which was the work of months, if not years. And I think all of that spoke about a very smart Taliban strategy, one that was very calculated. But now the Taliban themselves are facing the challenges of what any government in Afghanistan would face if we look back to the history. And that is, how do they make sure that the country is functional? How do they make sure that they can provide jobs? How can they make the Hamid Karzai International Airport, functional to the level where flights can take place to the regional countries? This was the gateway of Afghanistan to the world. And to me, what I observed among the Taliban when I was in Kabul, they're foot-level soldiers or people from rural Afghanistan who've been fighting for years, losing their family members. They've got really no idea how to police, how to govern the very sprawling, complex neighborhoods of Kabul city, a city of at least 6 million people.
What of you and your family? Can you ever see yourself returning?
I think we will cling to that hope that one day we can and we should. It is our homeland. It's our home, after all. But I'm not personally very optimistic. What Afghanistan has done over the last 20 years to myself and millions of Afghans, it has broken our heart time and again. And I think it is just that complexity of the situation on the ground where our hopes have been shattered. For example, we were hoping over the last 18 months or so that finally Afghanistan would have a permanent and comprehensive ceasefire, that peace would come, that we would be able to resume normal life, But looking at the attacks yesterday in Kabul, the threat of bloodshed is there. It's not only the Islamic State, it's thousands of foreign fighters. It's organizations like Al-Qaeda that have had a massive presence. And even if the Taliban wanted at some stage to take on these foreign fighters of the Islamic State, and they were genuine about it, to get the trust of the international community, to secure legitimacy and funding, they will not be simply able to do that. Because a lot of these fighters have an ideological, historical, and generational relationship with Taliban fighters. I'm talking about foreign fighters, I'm talking about Al-Qaeda, and there has been so many intermarriages in this third generation of these foreign jihadis, speak the local languages. They're almost members of the Afghan society. So how the Taliban can assure the United States and Western countries about future counterterrorism operations, I think this will be a very, very difficult challenge for them.
Bilal, good luck to you and your family. Thank you very much for coming on the programme. Bilal Sawawi there, live from Doha. The Pentagon has just said that 12,500 people have been flown out from Kabul airport in the last 24 hours on 89 flights. It's also confirmed that some gates around the airport are now closed, but passengers are still being processed.
American citizens, SIV applicants, and vulnerable Afghans who have the designated and proper credentials will continue to be processed for departure from the airfield. There are still approximately 5,400 individuals on the airport as of this report awaiting for flights out of Afghanistan. We have the ability to include evacuees on U.S. military airlift out of Afghanistan until the very end.
Well, China has condemned the Kabul airport attacks. The Foreign Ministry spokesperson said on Friday that the top priority now is to ensure the safety of Afghan citizens and foreigners.
China is shocked to see the heavy casualties caused by the explosion near Kabul airport. We strongly condemn the attacks. This incident shows that Afghanistan's security situation is still complicated and severe. We hope all parties will take the effective measures to ensure a smooth transition and ensure the safety of Afghan citizens and foreigners.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Afghanistan's biggest trade partner and biggest influencer. What does Pakistan want from the new administration in Kabul?
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And we're available in the UK 24 hours a day to view on Freeview.
Amid Afghanistan's chaos, the country still has to feed itself and buy and sell its goods. Pakistan has unique ties with Afghanistan and with the Taliban. But with thousands of people trying to flee, there are fears that shipments across the border could be disrupted. Daniel Khan reports now from Torkham, one of the busiest land crossings.
Pakistan is Afghanistan's largest trading partner. 48% of Afghanistan's total exports went to and 14% of imports came from Pakistan. Movement on both sides of Torkham has increased massively as cargo trucks continue to cross the border, contrary to fears of a reduction in Pak-Afghan trade due to the changing situation in Afghanistan. As a result, trade activities at border crossings have picked up momentum. Some even go as far as calling the Taliban takeover a blessing in disguise. I have seen a significant rise in the transit trade as well as import and export. In the times of the previous government, there were only 30 to 35 trucks going in and out of the country. But ever since the Taliban came, the number of trucks carrying goods has gone up to 300 to 400 daily. It is a very big number, and traders are very satisfied. Experts say the control of the Taliban has reduced security risks for Pakistan, and once the present transition period is over and stability returns to Afghanistan, Pakistan will be able to significantly increase exports. What I have seen during the last few weeks is that trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan has become very easy and convenient since the Taliban took control of the border facility. Previously, the traders and even the drivers had to go through a lot of hardships on the other side. But with the grace of God, now everything is smooth. The establishment of a pro-Pakistan government in Kabul can make Pakistan, especially Balochistan, safer, which will help complete China-Pakistan economic corridor projects, further attracting investment in oil and gas exploration along the Pak-Afghan border. Many believe that greater involvement of China, Russia and Pakistan in Afghanistan can play a positive role for the country's stability and development. Daniel Khan, CGTN, Torkham, Pak-Afghan border.
Well, staying with Pakistan, the information minister there, Fawad Hussain, says an inclusive government should have been established in Kabul, in Afghanistan, much earlier, which he says could have prevented the current crisis. Well, I've been asking him what Pakistan wants now from a Taliban-led administration.
Afghanistan is a very complex and ethnically divided country, and actually the kind of theme that you can rule Afghanistan exclusively may not work, and you need more ethnic groups representation in the government, and we are actually suggesting the same theme to Taliban also, and new authorities in Afghanistan, they must also work on an inclusive government. And this is the only way through which you can have a stable government in Afghanistan.
That doesn't seem to be the hallmark of the Taliban so far. Inclusivity isn't something we associate with the Taliban, and that's precisely, it seems, what the Afghans that have fled across the border are escaping from. How many do you think have made their way into Pakistan? Do you have any idea of the numbers?
First, I don't agree with you. Actually, all the statements of Taliban are actually that they are willing to have an inclusive government. And this is actually something very encouraging. As far as the people on Pakistan, this is actually the worst fear of us. Right now, we are hosting about 3.5 million Afghan refugees. Our economy is not that strong that we can take more burden. But up till now, actually, there is no real migration from Afghanistan to Pakistan, except the foreigners for which we are helping in evacuation. We have helped about 4,000 people evacuate from Kabul. But in real terms, the migration is not taking place right now, and our borders are fairly normal.
Looking at the deteriorating security situation, particularly around Kabul airport yesterday after those bomb explosions went off, to what extent is the Taliban able to control this new jihadist movement, ISIS-K?
Well, frankly, right now, the way world is abandoning Afghanistan is extremely dangerous. And if you ask me, there is a need of engagement with new authorities as soon as possible. Because if there will be a vacuum in Afghanistan, it will become a headquarters for all the terrorist organizations in the world, including Daesh, ISIS. And the kind of the dangerous philosophy the Daesh and other extremist organizations carry will be dangerous not only for Afghanistan but for the whole world. And I think Pakistan believe that this is a time where world needs to engage with the new authorities in Afghanistan. If we abandon them, it will create a huge vacuum and we will be in a mess.
In the United States, the New York Stock Exchange fell silent ahead of the open. Instead of the usual ringing of the bell to mark the start of the trading day, a moment of silence was observed to remember the lives lost in Kabul, including the 13 U.S. service personnel. Well, Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell has given his strongest indication yet that the central bank could start scaling back its pandemic stimulus program this year. Powell was delivering his highly anticipated speech at the annual Jackson Hole Economic Summit and provided an optimistic but rather cautious outlook. Our correspondent Caroline Malone is in Washington watching events. Caroline, what did Powell have to say?
Well, that's right. The Federal Reserve Chair Powell has said that the US Central Bank could begin reducing its monthly bond purchases this year, so in a matter of months. Although it's not going to be in a hurry to begin raising interest rates after that. Instead, they've said they're going to hold at the target rate at current levels until the economy is at maximum employment and inflation is on track to moderately exceed about 2% for some time. So the Fed's saying that it will not start dialing back its ultra-low rate policies until the labour market and hiring continues to improve. Well, importantly, COVID and the Delta variant continue to impact many parts of the US economy and recovery. And Powell actually mentioned that specifically, that Delta is a short-term risk. Well, let's have a listen to more of what he said on that.
With vaccinations rising, schools reopening, and enhanced unemployment benefits ending, some factors that may be holding back job seekers are likely fading. While the Delta variant presents a near-term risk, the prospects are good for continued progress toward maximum employment.
And we should note there that Powell was actually speaking at the Federal Reserve's annual Jackson Hole Symposium that took place virtually, of course, this year due to those continued COVID risks. However, the unemployment rate in the US has been falling steadily over the last few months. It actually fell to 5.4% in July. Total US employment is still about 6 million jobs, something like that, below pre-pandemic levels. So the labour market is not quite back to those early 2020 numbers, but certainly heading in the right direction for recovery.
That's the domestic scene. What about global factors? Does Powell see in play?
Well, absolutely. Powell actually said there are global disinflationary factors that could play a part. So that is part of the reason why the Fed is so closely watching those inflation numbers. Last year, during Powell's speech, he actually unveiled a new strategy for monetary policy after a 20-month review. And what that really means now for Fed officials is that they'll allow further economic expansion, recovery in this case, before raising those interest rates. And that's precisely in order to drive unemployment rates down faster, make sure people of all income levels can share in what they hope will be the benefits of a future, stronger economy.
Have the words moved the numbers? I wonder, has Wall Street reacted to Powell's comments?
Yes, well, after that moment of silence, actually, US stocks did open higher this morning ahead of the Fed chair's speech. And Wall Street continues to reflect some of that cautious optimism. It's actually now pushing higher since Powell spoke. And they're near now to all-time highs on the market due to the expectations of stronger economic growth to come. That could also encourage, of course, higher corporate profits.
Caroline, good to see you. Thanks very much. Caroline Malone there in Washington for us.
Well, let's bring you some business news in brief now. And the European Union is to investigate Nvidia's planned takeover of UK chip designer ARM. A competition probe will reportedly start once the tech firm formally notifies the EU of the $54 billion deal. Last week, Britain's regulator said the acquisition needed further investigation as it could damage competition.
Apple boss Tim Cook has received a $750 million payout as he marks 10 years in the job. Cook cashed in the 5 million shares he was awarded in the world's most valuable public company as part of an incentive deal when he replaced Steve Jobs as CEO. The agreement was related to Apple's share performance. The company's stock has risen by over 190% in 3 years.
China is putting companies that overwork their employees on notice. The country's top court said the practice of so-called 996, meaning working 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week, is illegal. Commonly implemented by many big technology firms, the practice has been deemed illegal.
Profits at China's industrial firms rose 16.4% to more than $108 billion in July, and for the first 7 months of the year, they were up more than 57%. That's thanks to a stable recovery in market demand and improving business performance. Analysts, though, warn a rise of commodity prices and global supply bottlenecks ahead. Europe.cgtn.com has all the week's top stories from China. Here's a quick look. More on all of those stories at CGTN.com.
You're with CGTN in London, and still to come. Last month, they were terrorists. Now they're in charge and facing attacks from rival groups. What next for the Afghan Taliban government?
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, make you loud, clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very busy when we try to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Polly Middlehurst. Our top stories: the last airlifts from Kabul airport after the deadly bombing, which killed more than 100 people, including 13 US service personnel. Unconfirmed reports suggest the death toll may be as high as 170.
And as you've been hearing, the US central bank chief says he's going to start winding down support for the economy in the wake of the pandemic by the end of the year.
Let's take you back to our top story. Thursday's attack in Kabul has been claimed by ISIL, and it bore all the hallmarks of the group: precisely timed explosions with gunfire in between. Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler was the former coordinator of the ISIL, Al-Qaeda and Taliban monitoring team at the United Nations Security Council. He joins us now. Welcome. First of all, I wonder, could yesterday's bomb attack have been prevented?
Thank you for having me. No, I don't think this could have been prevented. The Taliban, who are now in charge of security in Kabul, were until very recently in the business of perpetrating terrorism rather than preventing it. And counterterrorism is something very different from terrorism. So it was a very little chance that this would have been prevented by the Taliban. And the international forces are now so thinly stretched around the airport that they didn't really have the ability to have a decent perimeter around the airport. So unfortunately, the luck and all the circumstances was on side of the Islamic State Khorasan this time.
Beyond the airport and beyond Kabul, as you see it, what are the key security challenges in Afghanistan now?
There are really three buckets of challenges. First is the terrorism challenge, which is the obvious one. The Taliban are still in a symbiotic relationship with Al-Qaeda and quite a few of its affiliates who operate already on Afghan soil, and they have no intention to rein them in. Secondly, the second bucket is, of course, a humanitarian crisis, which is brewing in the country. The banks have been closed for several weeks now. People are running out of money and food. And the third challenge is a medium-term challenge. There is going to be a rather sizable wave of Afghan refugees that is going to start walking towards Europe. So these three buckets, all of which need attention quite immediately from European authorities right now.
The Taliban is clearly militarily competent. I wonder, what are your expectations of the Taliban's ability to govern Afghanistan?
Well, that remains to be seen. In the last 20 years, they had very little appetite to govern, even in provinces and districts that they held for a very long time. And their only emphasis was on military and security and providing justice. Roads, power lines, schools, even hospitals were still built by the money from the Kabul government, and they allowed the Kabul government to send their inspectors, even for schools, into their districts. So they haven't really governed, they ruled by force. It remains to be seen if they are even able or willing to govern this country once they are now fully in charge.
Speaking with your old hat on, the United Nations has, of course, been dealing with the Taliban as a terror group only a matter of days ago. Now, perhaps they will end up running the country in some shape or form. I wonder how easily will the international community find it to make that transition and deal with them politically and economically?
Well, the international community dealt with the Taliban already when they were running the country in the 90s. And that's why there is a still existing United Nations sanctions regime against the Taliban, the 1988 sanctions regime. Now we have to be very careful not to buy into too fast into rather conciliatory statements that are very broad by the Taliban. Women are allowed to work but should stay home for their own security. Human rights will be respected in the framework of Sharia. Journalists can work in the framework of the Sharia. All of this needs to be further elaborated by the Taliban to see whether they are a responsible actor in Afghanistan or whether they are still the same group that left power in 2001.
When President Biden vows to hunt down the perpetrators of the Kabul airport bombing, what does that mean? How do you see that unfolding?
Well, I mean, the Americans have demonstrated over the last couple of years in other countries where they never had any US troops, like Yemen, like Somalia, for a long time, that they are able to push back terrorist threats. But this requires, number one, a very good capability to strike over the horizons, which they have, the ability to monitor electronic communication, which they have had very well in Afghanistan, but without a partner, this is going to be more tricky, and very importantly, a human intelligence network, which, given recent events, is going to be very, very difficult for the Americans to rebuild, reestablish, and maintain, at least in the short term.
What impact do you foresee for security in Europe and beyond?
Well, there is a dual impact. On the one hand, we now have a country again where Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are present, and the Taliban have demonstrated very little willingness to rein those in. This is a strategic danger, and already now in Germany, there is a cell of Tajik perpetrators who had been, in a classic 9/11 style, instructed from Afghanistan, trained in Afghanistan to perpetrate attacks here in Germany, and they were arrested last year. So, this situation is going to continue. The second real problem is going to be to ensure that Afghanistan doesn't get the same draw that it had in the 90s and that Syria and Iraq had a couple of years ago, and attracts foreign terrorist fighters from all over the world who then come and train in Afghanistan with Al-Qaeda. Now, this is already materializing if you look at the social media space of the global affiliates of Al-Qaeda, who all celebrate the victory of the Taliban and the rather critical stance that the Islamic State globally took towards the takeover of the Taliban, saying, we had a caliphate and you destroyed, the Americans destroyed it, here that Americans are handing over Afghanistan to the Taliban, which I also think is one of the motivations for the attack yesterday, to regain the propaganda control globally by the Islamic State, showing that they're still relevant, showing that they're still dangerous and able and willing to kill others.
Dr. Hans-Jakob Schindler in Berlin, thank you very much.
Well, many Afghan officials, including the president, fled Afghanistan as chaos ensued, but a former minister has now returned to the country to campaign for an inclusive government. CGTN's Sun Tianwan spoke to Omar Zakirwal.
In Kabul, interacting with Taliban leaders, interacting with other leaders, speaking very frankly what needs to happen, and through talks, hopefully, and through confidence building, and through understanding each other, and through reasoning, we should be able to get it right. I have confidence in the collective wisdom of this country, and the collective wisdom of hopefully the politicians as well. And also my coming back gives confidence to others who are fleeing the country. I call on them every day. They must not flee the country. They must be brave. They must take their stand. If they're scared, my presence become reassuring for them. If I, as a former minister, senior minister, if I, as a former very active person, could be here and I'm not afraid, why should they be afraid?
How is the local economy and foreign trade doing since the Taliban's takeover, and how have businesses reacted to the big change?
There's a disruption, and that disruption, there's uncertainty. So both disruptions in uncertainty are not good to the economy. So the economy is depressed as we speak. People are concerned as we speak. People are temporarily out of jobs. Because of the lack of security, investments that could put Afghanistan on sustainable economic growth has not happened. So certainly the economic picture outside is not a very good one. In fact, it's a very gloomy one.
Meanwhile, the French European Affairs Minister Clément Beaune says the country will end its evacuation operation in Kabul sooner rather than later, but may seek to extend it beyond the Friday evening deadline. Let's talk to our correspondent Ross Cullen, who's in Paris for us. And Ross, bring us up to date. What is the latest on the French evacuation operation in Kabul?
Well, I think we should kick off with the news that the Taliban's political office has held talks with French envoys in the Qatari capital, Doha. A tweet from the Taliban spokesperson saying that the representatives from the political side have been having discussions about politics, future stability of Afghanistan with the French envoy. And from the French side, we have had confirmation to French media that what the French Foreign Ministry describe as operational contacts have been had, and they're mostly to do with the ongoing evacuation mission that France has been conducting from Kabul airport. But examples there of Western countries that are starting to realise they may have to enter into some more formal negotiations, formal discussions with the Taliban as the deadline for the withdrawal of US forces and all other forces on the 31st of August from the airport as that approaches. And just touching on that, you mentioned Clément Beaune. He's saying that the deadline set by the French Prime Minister earlier in the week for the last flights to be concluded by the evening of Friday the 27th of this evening might have to be extended because of the delay to the evacuation operations that has been caused by the disaster that we saw yesterday, with more than 100 people losing their lives in the bomb attacks. But France has evacuated more than 2,000 Afghans and more than 100 French citizens from Kabul so far. It started that evacuation mission in May, in the spring, with non-essential staff, and so because it has already evacuated many people early, it's been able to free up some capacity, so it's been able to evacuate European Union officials and other partner nation citizens as well. But hopefully, in terms of the French Foreign Ministry, they will be able to conclude their evacuation mission either this evening, Friday evening, or shortly over the weekend.
And Ross, what about President Macron? We know that he is due to visit Iraq Friday to Sunday. What's going on there? What's his trip about?
Well, the Afghanistan crisis will be one of the talking points at a regional summit. Iraq is trying to position itself as a mediator to try to find a way of easing regional tensions, particularly between the two big foes, the Shia Republic Iran and the Sunni Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. They're going to be attending the talks along with other countries from the region, discussing how to ease those tensions, how to find constructive paths of dialogue, and also talking about the financial and structural collapse of Lebanon, the war in Yemen, and of course the Afghanistan crisis. There is going to be a leader attending the talks who's not from the region. Emmanuel Macron is going to Iraq this weekend for a two-day trip. He will be in Baghdad tomorrow, speaking about those meetings with regional leaders and also meeting the Iraqi Prime Minister and the Iraqi President before going to the north of the country on Sunday. It's really trying to support Iraq in its path to try to get more control over its sovereignty and re-establish itself as a stable nation in the region. But of course, a lot of the eyes and a lot of the discussions will be on what's happening in Afghanistan.
Ross Cullen, thank you.
Well, as the evacuations wind down, tens of thousands of people have already fled Afghanistan by air or by land. Across Europe, countries are bracing themselves for an influx of refugees. Greece is among the countries expected to bear the brunt of migration into Europe. Evangelos Tsipsas reports.
These scenes of chaos and uncertainty bring back strong memories for Rezare Mokhtar. He fled Afghanistan over 20 years ago for the exact same reason.
When the civil war started, I was in Afghanistan with my family. As you can see, I still have the scar from then. When I look at myself in the mirror, I always see the scar. Sometimes I feel pain. It's part of me now. Everywhere I go, it follows me. It will always haunt me. It will always remind me what I went through and who the Taliban are.
With the Taliban back in charge, there's concern that millions more may now head to Europe. Haunted by the 2015 migration crisis fueled by the Syrian war, Greek politicians and ordinary citizens desperately want to avoid another large-scale influx of refugees and migrants.
More refugees will be a burden for every country, but since I believe in helping people, we really should help the refugees, those who really need it.
Greece can't handle any more refugees, at least with the way things currently are. With the pandemic going on, with wildfires, everything is slowing down. To be honest, I can't even support myself. Things have become very tough.
Greece has extended a wall along its land border with Turkey with a new 40-kilometer steel fence. Drones, cameras and radars have been installed and extra guards are being hired.
The Afghan crisis is creating a new normal in the geopolitical sphere and at the same time is creating the possibilities for migrant flows. Greece participates in European Union decisions, but we cannot wait passively for the possible impact.
Greece is already home to about 500,000 refugees, with 50,000 of them being from Afghanistan. Most of the new arrivals are from Afghanistan. The previous migrant crisis has stretched Greece's finances and resources to its limit. The Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis says that the country has already shouldered a great burden and insists Greece will not be a place of transit. Evangelos Sipsas for CGTN, Athens.
Well, as the Taliban take over Afghanistan, they're also taking over social media to spread their influence. That has in turn put pressure on US social media giants to decide whether or not they should be allowed on their platforms. Our correspondent Mark Lee reports now from Silicon Valley.
San Jose State University journalism professor Halima Kazem Stoyanovich was born in Afghanistan and worked there as a journalist and researcher from 2002 to 2007. She's been monitoring what Taliban representatives post on Twitter.
So this is a primary account, Sahel Shaheen. Earlier this week, his followers were at about 200,000, and we see that they've almost doubled in the last week.
She has mixed emotions when viewing Taliban posts, which include videos of road building and girls going to school.
A lot of what they're posting has to do with Kabul, but there is a deafening silence in the provinces. I get private messages on WhatsApp and Signal from the provinces, and it's very different. Women are being turned away from school, journalists are being threatened.
Kazem Stoyanovich responded to a Taliban spokesperson by posting this photo.
This is how this woman was asked to come to work today. No commentary. And boy, was I bombarded with hate comments from people who supported the Taliban. They could be trolls, they could be bots.
Twitter has rules against hateful conduct, which so far the Taliban appear to be navigating.
They're being very careful to not be kicked off, and they're pushing back against companies that ban them by sort of throwing up the rhetoric of free speech. And obviously, the Taliban have not allowed people to have free speech.
Facebook told CGTN the Taliban is a sanctioned terrorist organization under U.S. law, and this means we remove accounts maintained by or on behalf of the Taliban and prohibit praise, support, or representation of them. YouTube is also not allowing Taliban-affiliated accounts.
It goes beyond just the main three, by the way. I was reading about how in the weeks before the fall of Kabul, the Taliban were, for example, very active on Clubhouse.
Social media companies are working to secure accounts. Facebook has temporarily removed the ability for people to search the friends list of account users in Afghanistan. LinkedIn has temporarily hidden user connections there too. But Kazem Stoyanovich says many Afghans are already working to completely erase their social media profiles.
We could even ask and say, what role did social media actually even have in getting them here? That's a good question to ask. Because if their accounts were not suspended in the past, did it lead to their building a base and coming into power now?
For now, Kazem Stoyanovich anxiously tries to communicate with friends back home. while looking for clues online to determine what is fact and what is fiction. Mark New, CGTN, San Jose, California.
Austria's former Vice-Chancellor, Heinz Christian Strache, has been found guilty of corruption and given a 15-month suspended prison sentence. The case, which is part of the Ibizagate scandal, relates to Strache trying to change legislation while in office to benefit a private clinic in return for donations to the far-right Freedom Party. Strache's lawyer says he will appeal against the verdict.
The South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for more investment in Africa and more COVID-19 vaccine supplies. He's currently in Berlin, in Germany, along with other African leaders for talks with the Chancellor Angela Merkel, part of the G20 Compact with Africa conference. 13 African countries are there.
Football superstar Cristiano Ronaldo is set to return to former side Manchester United. The Portuguese forward had been linked with club rivals Manchester City, but United confirmed that they have reached agreement to re-sign Ronaldo from Juventus, subject to personal terms, a visa and a medical. The five-time Ballon d'Or winner spent 6 years at Old Trafford, scoring 118 goals in 292 appearances before leaving for Real Madrid in 2009.
And if that hasn't cheered you up, what about this? Saying it with sheep. An Australian farmer has found a novel way to pay his final respects to his aunt. Pandemic restrictions meant that Ben Jackson was unable to attend his Auntie Deb's funeral in Brisbane, so using carefully placed food, he arranged hundreds of ewes into the shape of a heart, as you can see with the video shown at the funeral. Ben perfected this sheep shaping technique during lockdown.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, please have more babies. The city paying parents to have more than one child.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
The fight against poverty has suffered a setback.
We are at a turning point in history.
There's a world under great distress and disruption.
But solving the crisis is still possible.
Change is indeed coming.
Join me, Stephen Cole, for a special 1 hour-long show here on CGTN where we speak to some of the world's top leaders and experts standing on the front line of the fight against poverty.
It's a real mistake to think that the future is decided for us. We need dialogue.
We'll spark debate.
The biggest challenge is addressing inequality.
We'll explore the solutions.
This can be done, but it requires everybody working together.
And we'll showcase the success stories to reveal how the cycle of poverty can be broken. Innovation, action, change. Only on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. Now, earlier this year, China relaxed its population control measures. Families are now allowed to have 3 children.
But a city in the southwest of China has taken it yet one step further, becoming the first in the country to offer cash to parents who have more than one child. CGTN's Nicole Ng has the story.
This little girl is just 2 months old. She's special to her parents, of course, but she's also special in another way, as the first child to benefit from the first official cash incentive in China for families who have a second or third child.
My
little daughter was born on June 28th, just in time for this policy. And it just so happened that it was the first in Panzhihua to register for the subsidy.
The city of Panzhihua rolled out the measure just a month ago. Parents to get 500 yuan, around $77 a month, for each additional baby until they turn 3. It mightn't sound like much, but Yang Jun says it's a start.
Even though 500 yuan for her clothes and all her other expenses is not enough, but I think it's enough to cover her baby formula. She drinks A2, which costs around 250 yuan a can, and she'll drink about 2 a month, so that's 500.
We travelled to Panzhihua also to speak to government officials to ask them what's behind the decision to use cash subsidies and what they hope to achieve. Huang Zhiwen is part of the city's research team. He says, despite what it looks like, the measure isn't just about boosting the birth rate.
We don't expect that because of the policy, every family will have 3 children. That's for each family to decide. But apart from childcare subsidies, we also help support elderly parents. So a full range of services from birth to old age.
A wider welfare program, he says, aimed at attracting talent.
Panzhihua is an immigrant city. People come from all over the country. So we want to grow our human capital and bring in more talent. When that happens, that is a key to development.
It's an ambitious plan that relies on supporting people to support those around them. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
The headlines again. The United States says it will continue airlifting people out of Kabul airport until the very end. President Biden has been speaking about the deadly bombing at the airport, which killed more than 100 people, including 13 American service personnel. That's as unconfirmed reports suggest the death toll may be as high as 170.
The mission there being performed is dangerous, and is now it's come with a significant loss of American personnel. And but it's a worthy mission because they continue to evacuate folks out of that region, out of the airport. We've evacuated more than 12,000 additional people out of the airport in the last 24 hours. I met with my commanders this morning, first thing in the morning, got a detailed briefing about yesterday's attacks and the measures they're taking to protect our forces and complete the mission.
And that's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More, of course, on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com. And do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. I'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Bye-bye.